Welcome to PWI Live. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. I don't normally like to start by talking about the weather because, weather is different for people who are listening to this in Shanghai. I think we have people that listen to this in Thailand. I know that we have a regular listener from the Asian Pacific area. And also just like Pittsburgh is different than State College is different than Philly. But if you live in the Northeast, and most of our subscribers and viewers live in the Northeast, oh, damn, is it hot. So it's like winter. We're staying inside today, hunkering down and talking about Penn State football. Normally we talk about recruiting on the Thursday show, but, some pretty big news happened last week. So we're going to start off talking about Penn State recruiting. Nate's going to be here for it because Nate wrote a recruiting article. Honest to God recruiting article, and I know Fitz is giving something like that. Yeah, but I of the thousands of articles he writes, it's the closest that he got. So Nate, welcome to the show. How you feeling? Is it feeling awkward, or are you feeling ready for this?
Awkward to talk about recruiting?
Yeah,
so super awkward. But look, within the framework of the bigger picture, sure, that's wheelhouse stuff for me. Let's do it.
Well, it is June 24th, so it's big picture time. And Fitz, we're going to have two separate recruiting conversations. We're going to have one at the end of the show because there was stuff that happened that didn't involve Penn State losing recruits. They also hosted a bunch and had a whiteout camp, and there's more news coming up this weekend. So Fitz and I are going to talk about the end of the show, and of course, we're going to have some Penn State football team-specific news throughout the show. So Fitz, how are things going for you this weekend? Staying cool over there in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, trying to. Was without power for like 2.5 hours yesterday, so that was fun. But we're back, and we didn't stretch it into 3 days like we did last time, so that's good. Nothing much changing. It's hot. It's summer. Whatever. I'll deal with it and stay inside and stay hydrated. And we're not to the ad read yet. Okay, great. Sounds good.
Yeah, we'll get to the hydration here in a second. But to start off, Penn State fans that are here already know this. Notre Dame came through last week and in a bunch of close recruiting battles, won the commitment of Khary Adams, Joey O'Brien, Greyson McKeogh. Not pictured here, also Luke Wafle going to USC. So Penn State losing these top battles, which I think created a lot of news for Penn State football fans and also for the recruiting world at large. So Fitz, I want to ask you this to start, and I'm trying not to lead the witness here, but I do think that there is an emotional and there is a strategic aspect of this, and you are well versed in both. Is this loss more emotional than strategic, given there are top players available at some of those positions, including Dorian Barney and Carter Meadows, who are both out there? Or is this as bad as it feels for Penn State fans who are very upset this week?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a one or the other situation. I mean, it's bad. I mean, I'm not gonna say that. On the other hand, the cycle does not end in June, which is positive. Penn State was able to flip a couple guys late last cycle, and I expect them to try and do the same. But you can't hang your hat on that. You can't sit here in June and say, well, they'll get them in December, because it's a low yield investment if you do that. So yeah, I think it's not great. It's a bunch of stacked up body blows that come, unfortunately, to the team that you lost to in the Final Four last year. Like that is kind of the crux of the situation here. Luke Wafle, I think, is his own animal. Like, it's a very different conversation. But when you are going up against a program like Notre Dame that has a lot of buzz right now off the field, and then it just beats you head to head, I think that makes it even tougher to swallow. So yeah, I think it is. It's fine to feel frustrated, because you could see, especially if you're following along at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, you can see those guys get within reach, and then all of a sudden that pool gets too deep, and Penn State finds themselves out of play for some players. Now, you can also go back and say not everything is NIL. They got flat out beat on a couple of these guys that they were in really good position for. So the money aspect is going to play into it, but it's always been case by case recruiting case by case basis on recruiting, and you break some of these down even further, and that's worrisome, because we put out a big board in May, and I think 4 of the top 5 on that big board are off the board already to not Penn State. So that's a tough way to go about it, and and it's a long cycle, but at the same time, you can't go back around and say, well, they'll flip it in the end. It's tough.
Yeah, I think that to say that Penn State lost because of NIL and NIL alone is also kind of, I don't want to say letting off the hook, but is not giving the full picture, as Fitz pointed out. However, using a Nate Bauer phrase there, a little turn, I want to read what Nate wrote last week, because I thought this was just very well put. It's a little bit longer. I was going to put it up on the screen, but I didn't have time. Ingrained in the culture of Penn State football was a long-standing rejection of under-the-table compensation. Its overnight transformation to legal and encouraged was a non-starter. In the nearly 4 years since, the program has made progress educating its donor class, benefits and support, but Penn State remains in a recruiting position all too familiar and reminiscent of its on-field experience, which for Penn State fans, as Fitz just pointed out, losing to Notre Dame in the semifinals, being a drive away from the national championship, just so close. So, Nate, this journey from let's educate players on NIL to we need to catch up. I don't want to say is this a culmination, but how do you view this big picture of where they've come from to where they are now, given it feels like this past week they should have been in position with some of the gains they've made to sway some of these targets their way?
Yeah, like should have been in position. I'm not sure. Look, a couple of things. Penn State has a structure to how it does these things. It makes sense, right? You've proven it on the field, and as you stay in the program and go through the program, you're going to make more money. And Penn State's going to work to make sure that is the case. For true freshmen, the budget just isn't that large, where you're able to say, hey, like, here's the problem. Here's the problem for Penn State. It wasn't close, right? Like, that's, if it's ballpark and you lose, and it's a question of, like, can you find some change in the couch cushions and come up with an extra $100,000? Okay. And then you lose. Okay. Right. Like, because you made that decision, you stressed it, you went as far as you could possibly stretch. Fine. Like, they're getting lapped in some of these recruitments. And so it's problematic, but it's also one that I think you can kind of shrug your shoulders at. Like, they're just, it's almost, this is the wrong path, but I'm going to go down it anyway. It's like real estate, right? You're house shopping, and you get pre-approved, and that number that you're pre-approved for makes you super uncomfortable, but you are pre-approved for it, and you can do that, right? And it's like, wow, man, that's way more house than I ever thought I could get. The house in some of these cases was $4 million, right? It was double. Like, it was.
Those aren't literal numbers. Not literal.
Yeah. I'm saying it was so far. It was double what you're pre-approved for. There's no like finagling it to kind of figure it out. So I just, Notre Dame fans like took exception to some of what I was saying, which should tell you something. Yeah, no, I know. Can you believe it? No, like, the problem is, I think that we collectively try to compartmentalize things so much that we lose sight of the big picture. And, like, here's the reality: Penn State's going to lose some recruiting battles to Notre Dame. And anyway, Notre Dame's an excellent school. It has an excellent football program. Yeah. There's every reason for recruits and their families to be enchanted with Notre Dame and that football program. Same with Michigan, right? The ones that have a similar footprint in its values right? Like, not saying that Penn State is on the same academic level as Notre Dame. Notre Dame
That's
is
exactly what you were saying, right?
That is not what I was saying. That is not what I was saying. But I will say and mean it. There are fewer schools than there are to the contrary that take academics as seriously as Penn State does, right? And so, like, it's a smaller collection of programs, and so that's why it fits a certain profile of recruit to like. There's a reason why these recruits put Michigan and Notre Dame in the same basket as Penn State when they're considering finalists. So yeah, it's but like, end of the day, Penn State's not there to actually be competitive when it comes to the money that it can offer, the compensation that it can offer to
the top 10% of your board, though.
Correct. Like, even higher than the top 10%, the top 5%, right?
Right. Well, Penn State's got 20 commits right now. And I don't know, just following along, you would think that they haven't gotten anybody in the entire cycle, but like, we've been saying all along that this class is going to be magnified, be defined by what it does this summer and the top guys that it brings in, because, you know, those guys have stars beside their name for a reason. They're great football players.
Yep.
And that's where they've fallen short, is that top, Nate, you said 5%, 10%. I mean, it's not really, percentages are stupid anyway. But
so there was a comment.
Yeah.
There was a comment that I read this week. It just stuck with me that Penn State will become, boiled down to, Penn State is closer to Iowa now, or Penn State is becoming Iowa because they can't get these top targets. And I think that what's clear is that Penn State is not Iowa. They are getting very good recruits, but they are, as you guys are pointing out, missing on some of those elite programs where they've been having these struggles to begin with the top schools that they've been competing against and being competitive with on the field over the last 5 to 7 years.
I mean, that's the thing about being 5 to 15, you know, like, you're always chasing those ones. And T Frank, we said on the show last week, punching up is something that is much harder to do than punching down. You know, Penn State's like doing the punching down thing. They've won the games that they've won against the regional opponents that they're supposed to win. They've won the recruiting battles that they've won for the most part against those regional recruiting battles, and great punching straight ahead. You know, you win some, you lose some. That's what happens. And then punching up, you get what happened over the last 2 weeks, I would say.
Yeah. Z-Man says money was only one factor, but it was a noticeable factor, is how he's phrasing this. And Nate, I feel like that was echoed in what you had to write. So let me ask you the question you asked out loud in your article, because I think this is the next step. What happens to unlock the war chest, the win against Ohio State, Oregon, and national championship? Does winning on the field and proving it first change the Penn State ethos among recruits? And I can even speak to this from my perspective, knowing some people that donate to the program that don't want to donate or have stopped donating because they don't like NIL. Like, classic, like, traditionalists absolutely abhor this situation. So does winning unlock a new breed of donor that's just out there waiting for Penn State to show them that there is, you know, a worthwhile investment to be had?
No. And it's not that blanket of a statement, because maybe there are, is
it a case by case basis?
Sure. Maybe
like
maybe it gives you a few inroads. But that I don't see that as the primary issue right now. The biggest issue is a singular, right? Because in a lot of these cases, that's what you're talking about, is a singular passionate fan who happens to be a billionaire and have that kind of money to throw around, where it just doesn't matter. They don't care, right? It's
a heck of a Venn diagram.
It's expendable. You know, Penn State is lacking in that one specific instance. It's not to say that they're not out there or that they can't be cultivated, right, to provide those types of resources. But I just think that this is a little bit of a unique moment, as it was really for the last 5, right? The last 5 years were, okay, you have got to support your player compensation through fans and only through fans. That's the only way that you can do it. Okay, that's gone. That's not the only way that you can do it. Now, you can do it through revenues. You can do it through revenue share. And Penn State has made an earnest effort and will be doing that in the revenues that are created ostensibly, hypothetically, from the stadium, right? The stadium is how Penn State makes money. And it's not only how Penn State makes money, it's how it differentiates itself from other programs. There's only a couple of programs that have 100,000 seat stadiums, right? And so if you have that gap of 20,000 seats, it might seem like a few shekels, but it's not. It's a lot. It's a lot of money, and it can help Penn State in its NIL endeavors. But you still need that component of fan support. And again, like, we're not talking about this isn't a guilt trip for fans that are considering whether or not to donate $50 a month to a collective. Like, that's not what this is. It is, are there major dollar donors who have the ability to do that? And now what the crossroads that Penn State is at is, all right, you can tap those people, because you've seen through the stadium that they are out there that do have a 7-figure check, that can write a 7-figure check. They wrote that for the stadium in the effort of reaping sustainable long-term revenues.
Right.
But in the short term, they're tapped. Like, Penn State doesn't have anybody to turn to. And I don't want to say anybody. There have been willing and loyal supporters of the program in the NIL space, but it's not at the level of those top 5% teams that Penn State is up against. And so that's what the big crisis of confidence, it seems to me, is among Penn State fans, is like they're missing the fact that Penn State is extremely competitive in NIL. Penn State has a ton of money that it's spending on NIL. Penn State is going to spend a ton of rev share on NIL. Is it as much as Notre Dame, Southern Cal, Oregon, Ohio State? No, it's not. And so they're gonna miss out on some of these guys because of it. And that's not the only reason, but it's a reason.
Yeah. Let's take a quick break to talk about beer, because I think that's one thing that can unite all of us. And Anti-Fragile is our favorite place to go grab a beer. Fitz, staying cool this time of year. I imagine the patio might not be the preferred place, but inside, great place to have a beer, right?
Absolutely. Actually did that after camp on Friday. Went down, had myself a cheesesteak, had myself a beer, sat down naturally right beside us. The BWI subscriber, James Franklin Covers, sitting there with
hey,
it was a great conversation. It was a great time, and that's what I always get when I go to Anti-Fragile Brewing on Calder Way. Definitely the best beer in State College for my money. And you've got the great atmosphere, you've got the cheesesteaks, you've got the beer, you've got the kombucha, you've got the mixed drinks. You kind of got everything that you need down there. So definitely get down there this summer. They do have a patio. I did walk out from the inside, which was beautifully air conditioned, to the patio the other day, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. But that's not the fault of the of the purveyor there. It's just hot. So loved going down there. Talking to Todd, the bartender. This is his shout out, because he seems to have heard you people when you come in there and say, "Oh, you're Todd. You're the guy from the podcast." Yes, that's Todd. He's a great guy. But wonderful time once again in Anti-Fragile. Get down there as much as possible, and in the summer when it's less crowded, you can talk to everybody in there, which is what I did the other day. It was great. Great group of people, so we appreciate their support. Hopefully they appreciate our support as well, because we believe in what we preach here, and that's good beer, good times, and good people. So thank you to them, and definitely get down there if you're in State College this summer and check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. You can check them out at the Brewers Fest coming up on July 19th. And of course, you should subscribe to their newsletter, where they're giving away a bunch of information. I shouldn't use the word giving away, where they're providing you a bunch of information about some changes that are coming, and positive changes where there's some expansion going on. So check all that out with Anti-Fragile. I always appreciate them for being here and being a sponsor of the show. Believe it in us as much as we believe in them. Okay. So there are a couple of ways in which this conversation progresses. And Nate, I'm coming back to you on this one in general, because and either of you are capable of answering this, so just chime in whenever you want, but I'll start with you, Nate.
Nervous.
Frank Buffone wants to know, has the recruiting disappointment resulted in possibly leading to a different strategy going forward? Meaning, as Nate laid out, you'll be compensated for playing at Penn State, but freshmen are not prioritized at the sacrifice revenue that should be going to players that have proven what they can do at this level. Would you say that is a consequence that Penn State is considering or should consider changing that strategy to provide more incentive for freshmen to join the class? Because let me add the counter narrative that people have provided to us in different locations, that if recruiting is the lifeblood and you are providing significantly less oxygen in the blood, then you will have a worse roster to then retain later. So that's the counter argument to what Penn State has tried to do. So do you think that there is any change on the horizon for what Penn State wants to do with the recruiting strategy?
No.
Okay.
Nate, can I reframe this real quick? Nate, if James Franklin and the program had the money to pay the guys the quote unquote market rate that other schools are paying, would they do it?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's do a history lesson. This is longer than probably I should take, but in 2014, I followed James Franklin around for weeks when he was doing the Coaches Caravan, and Mike Poorman of StateCollege.com, like for the entire lead, right, for like 2 weeks, James Franklin was talking about benchmarking and what other programs were doing and how Penn State had this room to grow to catch up to those things. And Mike Poorman asked him, and I will never forget it. He was like, what is Penn State's benchmark? What does Penn State set the ruler at under James Franklin? And he was like, player development is the thing that Penn State does better, differently, more effectively than anybody else. There is a strong argument to be made, given Penn State's resources, that its wheelhouse is Abdul Carter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like high 4-star, like not the 5 stars. Do you need 5 stars to win at this ultimate level? I think so, probably. Okay. And they have a few on this year's team.
There's some semantics to that too, of what constitutes a 5-star and rankings, and subjection of evaluation, and all that stuff.
But the lifeblood of the program and the thing that they can do well as with the coaches, the assistants that he hires, is develop players, is squeeze the juice, get as much as you possibly can out of these guys until the model changes and there's a salary cap that all schools have to adhere to, right? No creative accounting, whatever, until there's a cap or until there is a major donor for Penn State. Then the priorities, they don't have to be, but they will continue to be player retention. Develop the players that you have, develop the players that you bring into the program, and get them to be really good at playing football, and then make it impossible for them to choose to go to the NFL early because you have a financial compensation package that is competitive and makes them want to stay and aspire to win a national championship. Because there's a lot that these guys love about Penn State, right? That is more appealing, in fact, than going to the NFL, right? Playing with the buddies that you chose to play with, coaches that you chose to play for. All of those things with a strong financial package is very appealing to Penn State football players that are juniors and seniors. The second part is targeted portal activity, right? So not with a wide net, and you're not trying to catch a ton of fish and fill a ton of holes, but you are trying to pinpoint needs and then fill them and have the funds to do that. That's expensive. The portal market is more expensive than normal tiers of compensation in the room that already exists in that retention.
Right.
And then the third thing is going to be spending on high school recruits. And there will be times where Penn State says, okay, this guy is within the footprint, has to go to Penn State. Like they just, for perception, needs on the team, whatever it is worth going above and beyond, upsetting the apple cart a little bit, and just saying, okay, this is outside of the comfort zone, but it is worth the spend. But that's gonna remain free. And to be honest with you, I think that if Penn State if the situation was reversed and Penn State lost a bunch of guys that ended up coming, right? So let's throw out Zane Durant, Zachy Wheatley, Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, and lost those guys to the portal for a senior year splash, but not to the NFL, and Penn State brought in Joey O'Brien, nobody would be happy right now. Right? Like,
right.
There's not a single person who would be willing to make that trade among Penn State fans. And that's just until the funds change, until the funding changes, that's just what they're going to have to live with.
Fitz, I want to kind of end with this question. If there's more that we can discuss later, that's fine. But there's other things I want to talk about today, other than money, NIL, and recruiting. So Penn State has 4 of their top targets, a couple of which we assumed they were going to have to maybe stretch the financial model, as Nate just described, because of all of those factors. With those players off the board, does that free up Penn State to be more aggressive with some of their other top targets here down the stretch? Or is it just that is now no longer on the table and the process is the process going forward? Because, we'll get to some more later in the show of guys making decisions this weekend, and of course, guys who are still on the board, or flip potential later in the fall, as you've talked about, which is still on the table, but not something you're going to be expecting or planning for later.
Right. Yeah. As always, not as clear and direct as that. If you miss somebody, does their funds go to someone else? Not really, because you're still looking at basically paying in slots. And I know they do this with like the baseball draft and things like that. You figure out where this guy fits among your roster. And this is an internal conversation among your roster. And then you sort of tier him with the guys that you have and the guys that you're bringing in. So slot this guy in your number 2 receiver slot for the class of 2025, and that is worth $1 amount, and it's probably not as much as the number 1, more than number 3. Well, you guys get how slotting works. So it doesn't change that as a whole, because you're still looking at the entire enterprise, paying the guys that you have on campus, and then sort of trying to figure out and project a year or 2 out which are the guys that you're going to have to pay bigger money for to retain them for, like we saw this year with the running backs, like we saw this year with Nittany and Zane Durant and those guys. So it's a sum of the greater math, if you will, because you're looking at different opportunities there. And I don't see Penn State stretching. Penn State went out of its comfort zone for Luke Wafle, and it wasn't close. Like it wasn't there. Yeah. Like, but they've been willing to stretch for some guys. But their stretching is not what USC stretching is. It's not what Notre Dame stretching is. It's not what some of these other schools that they're going up against. And again, when you're 5 to 15 and you're punching up at 1 to 4 like that, you're going to lose a bunch of those battles because you don't have you don't have the arsenal to work with, I think. So that's going to be what's going to be tough is when you're defining this class and saying that Joey O'Brien and Khary Adams and Luke Wafle and Greyson McKeogh, who shot up the rankings, and I think he's a top 150 player, like he's a really good prospect. Like, yeah, those are the guys that are going to put you over the top. Now, going back to what Penn State has done, and this is kind of historical perspective going back. I don't know. We kind of cut the line at COVID now because it changed so many things. But the way that Penn State has gotten 5 stars is to get them in early. Some of them have taken multiple visits, some of them taken 0 official visits other than Penn State. And then they develop into Cooper Cousins was a 5-star at the end of the cycle. Kevin Brown, I think, is going to be a 5-star at the end of the cycle. Those are the guys that they've sort of been the most successful with. And, on one hand, it's a good sign you've got 20 guys in your class. But on the other hand, this could be a 30-man class if they hit on the guys that they hope to hit on. So right. I think that is kind of where you find yourself in just sort of that in the middle. It's easy to crunch down. And actually, it's getting harder to crunch down on some of these guys. We've seen it with Rutgers. You saw, Rutgers pays their slots. Like, is if Penn State's number 1, all right, let's go with Ydee Collier, who's a great prospect. I think Penn State, would be great. He could play here. But D1, DN4 or something like that. Whereas Rutgers, he's DN number 1. So DN number 1 is going to be worth more to Rutgers, and they're going to be able to make that stretch. So it's all changing. The money, of course, such a huge dynamic of things these days. Not everything, but such a huge dynamic of these things, and figuring out if you can allot the proper, or if you can get these guys in and not stray too much from your proper model. Mm-hmm. It's theoretically the right way to go about it. Like everything that everything makes sense from a on paper perspective, but they don't play the game on paper. They don't do the recruiting on paper. And then when you get a donor or you get a coach or somebody that is able to make that money work, and they get slighted or they get, kind of fed up with how things happening, that's when you see this change coming. You saw it at USC. I mean, right now, and this is not cut and dry. This is not how this works, but they're saving money, not firing Lincoln Riley and putting it back into the program, putting it back in the NIL, taking care of the guys that are on the roster, taking care of the recruits. I don't think it's a sustainable model. Like, I think on paper, I think it stinks. Like it's not something that I think you can pull off for multiple years. But if they start winning, then all of a sudden it feeds the machine and you go from there. So I think that's so incredibly tough to look at this and say that, there's a right way to go about it. And the right way is going to be the way that works 2 or 3 years from now.
So we'll put this down for now and talk about it later, probably on the Thursday show when we get around to this again. But I do want to talk about a couple of things. The first is that if you want to continue the conversation or you want to get the reporting and the sourcing that we're kind of discussing here, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com is the place to go get that information. Just $1. You get access for a week for that $1 to see us, try us, see if you like us, and then decide if you want to join us going forward. Then, of course, it's a year at the full subscription price. We'll be doing more giveaways here later in the summer, heading into the fall. So make sure you subscribe here to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel so you can get in on those when they're going to happen. And of course, if you're watching this and, I don't want to go too far here, but maybe negativity is bringing a couple people in the door that aren't normally here on a Tuesday. We got quite a big crowd. So if you're here for the first time, we talk about everything in real terms. We're not here to say the sky is falling and the house is burning, but we are here to give you the facts as we see them. And I think that these guys do the best job of that. So subscribe to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. That's a big help for us here as well. Okay. The team put out some of its updated roster numbers yesterday. Japri Coleman joined the team, and it was a good time to update the I always want to say heights and weights, but I don't think the heights change all that much. It's mostly just the weights on the roster. Again, Greg Pickle has all the breakdown of every single weight change at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. I wrote about the meaningful ones and what I see in those yesterday. But today, what I want to do here is I want to take a longer view, because 3 months, there might be a lag in some of the numbers. There might be a little bit of a massaging, not necessarily of lying or anything, but just like a guy was not available and suddenly like his weight changes dramatically or doesn't change at all at this time of year. But if we look at the numbers from January to now, you do see certain players have made pretty big transformations. So I wanted to start with the biggest losers over the course of the last 6 months. And I think this is a pretty interesting one, because I do think when you get into these numbers, they become decisions and not just the variance of Venga Ioane losing 5 pounds because he's 330 some pounds. Here's a list for people that are listening on the podcast. Caleb Artis has dropped 21 pounds. Venga Ioane is down 18 since last year. Alonzo Ford Jr. down 14. Jordan Mayer, another player, down 14. And TJ Shanahan, offensive lineman, down 13 pounds. Fitz, anything here that stands out to you, and anything here that you think is meaningful in the conversation about these players who have changed their bodies over the last 6 months?
No, I think it's pretty typical. You're looking at sort of summer restoration, if you will, and that season went long, and they went into the spring, and I think it's smart to pull that down. A guy like Alonzo Ford, who's coming off an injury, you expect him to drop some weight so that he can continue to make those appropriate muscles stronger and then build back on. He's a space eater inside, so you're going to want to see that weight go back up. But Venga's the guy that kind of jumps out to me. We've seen him at camp. He looks incredible. He looks really, really good. And for him to drop weight, I'm not sure it's so much about the poundage as it is about the body fat and things like that. Cause he's a solid dude. He is, he's very solid. So I don't really get too much into the weight type of things, especially this time of season, because you're going to be fluctuating so much anyway. And your camp weight is going to be kind of what tells the story here.
Yeah. Nate, anything that you think is interesting? I know that this is not necessarily your wheelhouse, but do you think, I guess here, the guys that I think are interesting, Caleb Artis, and I want to fold this into your conversation with Jim Knowles in terms of maybe some things that he brought up or some of the guys that he mentioned, or just generally his philosophies, because you had a chance to have an exclusive interview with him recently. Caleb Artis, I saw him at camp this weekend. He was on the side working out. He's down 21 pounds. He's about 305 right now. That's the best shape I've ever seen him in. A guy who was injured last year and a guy who's had injury problems throughout his career, from 325 down to 304 pounds. That's, how about this? I'll just say that's my opinion. Is there anything from Jim Knowles you think that ties into this conversation that you had a conversation with him about with his defense, his ideas, what he thinks about this year in particular?
Look, you guys obviously could speak to it more eloquently than I can, but control the defensive line, right? Control the line of scrimmage, I should say, with the defensive line, and then have really strong attacking, aggressive corners. That's his formula. He the one thing that he did bring up that I don't think necessarily ties into weight, but his like thing is explosive plays more than anything else, more than turnovers, more than splash plays, right? Sacks, like all those numbers are good and he wants those things, but his concept at its core is the elimination of explosive plays, which I thought was kind of interesting and maybe a little bit of an evolution. Like, it's always been important and for Manny Diaz and Tom Allen, but it seems a little bit different for Jim Knowles.
And I do think that part of that, especially with some of those guys forward and artists along the defensive line, not that they weren't mobile before, but making sure that's a priority for this defense is guys being able to move and not just plug gaps, but be able to change gaps, which I know has been a kind of a strategy in the team for a while. Here are the weight gainers over the last 6 months. Owen Alessini's almost in the freshman 30 club, where we've seen Penn State freshmen gain 30 pounds in the course of a year. And whether or not this original number of him coming in at 255 was from National Signing Day or January, over the course of, let's say, even a year from the start of his high school year or whenever he was measured first, gaining 30 pounds is incredibly impressive. He's up 29 pounds this year. Randy Adarica up 21. LeVar Arrington II, he's up 20 so far since January. Braz Thomas and Kobe Howard in the high teens, 18 and 17. A lot of these young guys. Liam Andrews plus 16 pounds. A lot of questions about him. Andrew Olish up 16 pounds up to, I believe, 226 at this point. Alex Tash and Ivan Kamaji are two that we point out here. There'll be more at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com of a full list of guys that gained 10 or more pounds since January. Tash up 16, Ivan Kamaji up 15. A lot of these guys are young fits. So, does this change your opinion on any guys that can contribute this year? Any guys that have the opportunity to be special teams players, even given they, where they might be in their journey of becoming a Big Ten body?
Yeah, I think there's a couple that kind of catch the attention. You had Kobe Howard at 202, and he's a naturally thicker receiver, not like Jeff Exonorthic, but like naturally thicker receiver. That if you're trying to build up and trying to get on the field as a freshman, you kind of got to get bigger and get ready for the Big Ten that way. Alex Tash is a guy that has the ability to play on special teams right away. He's dealt with some injuries in the last year or so, but he's the ability to play on special teams and potentially get in there. They're very high on what he can be. And then Ivan Kamaji is I think the obvious guy that we keep talking about as a potential member of that rotation, especially without Max Granville, who is going to miss significant time here. So those are the three that jump out to me. And I'll throw in Brian Kordovich there too. I've always been high on Kordovich. 243 pounds as a true freshman. He is, I don't know that I would label him as a freak, but like his athletic numbers are, you look at the kid and you don't see it. Like he's definitely more athletic than he looks there. So encouraged to see that group continue to grow.
Yeah, those tight ends, I thought it was interesting to see how they've developed so far. Matt Henderson coming in at 230 pounds. Kordovich, he's a little bit shorter than both Olish and and Henderson. So being 6'4", 243, that 243 goes a little bit farther than maybe on a 6'6" frame. So just interesting to watch those three tight ends who are very close together, watch their development early and see how that all progresses throughout time. Of course, like I said, we've covered this over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com in depth all year long. Great place to go and to check all that out. Now we're going to get to our second recruiting conversation coming up here on the BWI Live show. Nate's got to bounce, so that's it for him. Nate, what are you working on this week at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com so people can follow along?
Yeah, great question. I still have lots of stuff from Drew Aller, which I have not yet dived into. Excited to share some of that stuff. And Andy Kotelnicki, who was, I think I had 30 minutes with him, and we ended up talking for 50, and I got in trouble for it. But what are you going to do? You know, he's a talkative guy, engaging, and a lot of fun. So yeah, check it out all week. Lots of stuff coming from that stuff.
All right. And more recruiting here. Penn State had their whiteout camp, final OVs of the year. We are now in the dead period. So we're going to recap June here on Fitz's recruiting update. Fitz's recruiting update here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Of course, here on the BWI Live show. Make sure you subscribe and you like the video. Fitz, it was a busy recruiting weekend for Penn State. They had their Lash Bash and Whiteout camp moved up about a month. Usually it's in July. Now it's in June. Just first off the bat, how do you think that went in terms of changing things around because of the changes to the recruiting calendar? What's been the feedback or your sense of how things went this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, best of what's around, really. I mean, you're looking at changing the entire structure of, fitting everything at the end of July, which I think is great. Like, you get rid of that week, which was, basically coming back from vacation. You have camps to run, you have events to run. Then, by the way, you got to start camp on Monday. Like, I think that's a good idea for the sustainability of keeping college coaches in college football. Like, I think that's a big deal. As for the event, I think it's changed over the years, very much so. It used to be, one of those things that you would try and, like, for the class of 2020, say we're in the class of 2026 right now, get all those big guys in the class of 2026 that you could get to come to the bash. That's a thing of the past with summer official visits. And now all of a sudden you've got basically an underclassmen focused list that's coming through here. Still a lot of really good underclassmen coming through. The top 6 prospects in the three Pennsylvania rankings were all at Penn State this weekend. So that's a good sign. It continues to build that up, build up that relationship end of, hey, they got to prioritize the guys that are in their backyard, and they've done so. They've got the commits from the top 2 players in the state, in Keemon Spell and Khalil Taylor, who appear to be pretty committed. And then you continue to work on guys like Maxwell Hiller, Abraham Cisse. You just keep going down the list. And I think Pennsylvania focused is very, very much. It's very much there in 2026, but it's going to still be there in 2027. So I think it's good. The whiteout camp was solid. Got to see some more commits in action. Got to unofficially declare Ben Izuka as the camp MVP for June, because he was, frankly, probably at more camps than I was, and he was definitely performed better at those camps than I did. So it was a good month to get a chance to see those guys work and to continue to sort of unearth those younger guys that are just picking up offers now.
Yeah, he's quickly become one of my favorite linemen I've seen at camp. Not even considering this year, just given the way he performs in those settings. Ben Izuka has been, I think, a revelation for the class of 2026. I apologize. I should have had the video ready, but with all the things we were going on and writing about the recap of yesterday, which came out yesterday and today at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, I'm just building excuses of why we don't have the latest Ben Izuka highlights here from the whiteout camp. But James Franklin puts his offensive lineman through what I've called the Franklin Gauntlet. I don't know if that's what we call it all over the place, but what it is you start a position and then you go through every single other position consecutively. And importantly, and this is something that I think has become more clear, there's no break in between. You don't get to rest and then do it again. So it's not like you take a break and then you go back to back, 5 positions, usually against different defensive linemen, to test out a whole number of things. And again, I wrote this yesterday. I haven't seen somebody be as consistent or as competent at this as Ben Azuka has been not just once, but twice at camp. Franklin has done this to him twice, and he has, I think, stood out in both of those situations. So just a really good football player for Penn State there. Were there
I needed to buy time to think about what happened over the weekend. So I just mentioned Ben Azuka, and I knew that would set you off on a 2-minute thing. But no, you're right though. I mean, he's just he's very technically sound, and when you're technically sound, and you're at a disadvantage in those one-on-ones as an offensive lineman, but when you are technically sound and you can move your feet, that's a good thing. And he's got he's shown that he's got length to back it up, and we see him as a center prospect eventually, but also he can play some guard, and his tackle reps have not been bad either. He's not going to play out there, but like he's one of those guys that you could slot in there, and he's a little bit short to say he can play all 5 positions, but like he's got the skill set of somebody that can do so. Yeah,
for sure. Were there any other guys that stood out to you? I have my recap coming today, which, subscribe, all that stuff over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Were there other prospects or other commits that you saw? Because Penn State had a long list of its committed players there, continuing that history of the recurring history now of getting guys to camp and working with them to try and help them improve before their senior seasons. Anything that stood out to you from either of those groups?
Yeah, I think Amari Polidor, a guy that we didn't have a ton of information on based on the way that his recruitment played out and the way that he I wouldn't say committed suddenly, because we talked about it for a couple of weeks leading up to that on Blue White Illustrated, but it's one of those things that you kind of forget about this guy. And his recruitment turned into a conversation about St. Francis rather than a conversation about Amari Polidor. That's partially our fault. Our fault. Excuse me. But he was good. He was good on. That was Sunday. He was good on Sunday. He looks very smooth. He looks like a guy. His athleticism can fit in with that room. That's certainly a high bar there that Terry Smith has brought in of athletic players there. And yeah, you put him beside Jaziel Hart, and I thought Polidor more than held his own there.
Absolutely. The next thing here that we have to talk about, let's talk about OVs. We'll leave what's coming up next to end here, but the final official visit weekend was also on Friday and Saturday. It did take a backseat to the whiteout camp, given the number of talented players and commits, as you just mentioned, that we got to see for the first time. But Penn State did have official visitors on campus. Any feedback, anything that you want to share here on the show? Of course, more information at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Some of those specific details stay over there. Anything from the high level that you want to have a conversation about here with Jack Fuchs and some of the other guys. I was going to rattle them off, and I already forgot their names.
No, I mean, the one that you need to remember here is Pierce Peterson.
That's what I wanted to say.
Minnesota. He is listed as a linebacker on 3 at 6'5", and he said he weighed in at, I think, 199.8, so 200 pounds. He's a high school quarterback, but he is a tight end for Penn State. And I frankly, just think he's a tight end wherever he would end up. And he's down to Penn State and Minnesota. I mean, this is a sort of one of those classic battles of the in-state guy. Does he stay home, or does he pick the proverbial better program? Like, that's kind of where we're looking at with that. And you can't take a ton from his quarterback highlights, even though he throws some nice balls. But this kid is a ridiculous athlete. He's a 6'8" high jumper. He's a 48-second 400 guy. I believe he placed in states in the 100, 200, 400 and high jump. Like, that's pretty good for a 6'5", 200-pound tight end prospect. So just a super athlete, a guy that Minnesota obviously covets in state, but Penn State has really warmed on him. They offered him in March, and Ty Howell went out there a couple of times and quickly moved right up that list. And you saw Luke Sorensen cancel his visit and commit to Nebraska a couple weeks ago. Well, Penn State felt that they were, in solid enough position with Peterson that they didn't really want to spoil that by taking a commitment from Luke Sorensen. So I think that this is one that's going to turn around pretty quickly. He says that, a decision could come at any time. And he's down to those 2 schools. So it's all about the final discussions to be had. You're not going against Notre Dame. You're not going against USC. I think that's worth noting here. But Minnesota, who had a good win last night in Roman Voss to keep him home against Alabama, is going to push hard as well. So I'm very curious to see what the next couple of days hold for Pierce Peterson. But Penn State thinks they helped themselves this weekend.
This one I'm going to ask you a couple questions here. So this one I think is a great one for you. Gavin Yustler says, my 21st birthday is Arts Fest weekend. What's the first anti-fragile beer I need to pair with a cheesesteak? What's your go-to?
I mean, here's the thing about Anti-Fragile is they brew so much, and they're a small batch brewery, which is great for freshness, great for product. But I don't know what they're going to have on tap in 3 weeks when or 2 or 3 weeks when Arts Fest comes to town. So that's a good one. I had the Czech Pilsner the other day. It was terrific. Like I said, if you've listened to the show, I've moved away from the hazies and the IPAs, the things that put me to sleep in general, to the lighter stuff, and the Pilsners are really good, I think. So I would go with that. If you're 21, here's the thing. I got into good beer not when I was 21. So
Yeah.
I don't know that Anti-Fragile was the place that I would have gone when I was a student. I was probably down the street at the Den with $1.50 High Life pitchers or something like that. But you grow, you mature, and all of a sudden you find yourself at drinking the best beer in State College on the 21st. And if you're in there and I'm in there, let me know. I'll buy you a 21st birthday beer. So it's good.
Awesome.
I mean, it's community. It is. I told you about the atmosphere, right? Nice people, mostly me, but nice people.
So this is from the chat as well. UBS Calzone wants you to set this record. I would like you to set this record straight. Can you guys comment on the strategy of having official visitors occur earlier rather than later? And this can lead us into a conversation generally about June and how recruiting went for the program with the official visits. But I just want to make sure that that's not necessarily the plan that they want to go first. That's just, can you describe how kind of that situation unfolds?
Yeah, how that one's been described. And I think this is coming back to that May 16th, 18th weekend. And that was a dud because you had guys that you brought in that weekend. It started out as a weekend for Florida guys, basically, like guys that were well out of the region that you probably weren't going to get. And then all of a sudden it morphed into Joey O'Brien, Khary Adams. You've got top targets coming that weekend. And then all of a sudden you've got a month, like a full month behind it to make that work. It never made a ton of sense to me. I don't have a problem with the way that Penn State structured its June official visits. So the first weekend, which is May 30th, June 1st or whatever, that was the committed weekend. And then you get 2 big weekends behind that. And then of course you saw over the weekend that it was just 3 guys in and one a top target and the other 2 we'll see. So I don't have a problem with the way that June was structured, but they didn't assert themselves and bring in those guys from that May 16th weekend that they should have in June. Like those should have been, especially Joey O'Brien, a guy that had a different leader after every trip. How do you put yourself in that position? And from what I understand, they called him and he said, this is the weekend I want to do it. And they said, okay, great. But he also eventually canceled Tennessee, which was supposed to be this past weekend. And, ended up with Notre Dame with the last visit. And, Notre Dame was in this one the entire time. But as we've said, the entire process, like getting the last visit for Joey O'Brien could be paramount. Ended up it was. So you brought in Joey O'Brien, you brought in Khary Adams, Messiah Hampton, who, kind of soured on Penn State early. We were surprised he took that visit. And Sincere Johnson, who was going to Ohio State all the way. That weekend has become like bury the tape type stuff. Like it was not great for Penn State. So I think they stay away from that next year. I think what's interesting to me, and I heard this a lot, especially with the defensive line, is a lot of guys were up front that they were going to take visits. They were going to organize their offers, and they were going to come back around at the end of those visits. So I'm curious if that goes into the strategy next year, where we saw this last weekend be very, very light, if that maybe pushes that back a week. But honestly, I don't have a problem with how June was scheduled out, the way that they structured that. But that first May weekend, hindsight's telling you everything. But
but there's also certain things you can't control. If a kid wants to come that weekend, that's the weekend he's going to show up. You can't force him to come during the your bigger weekends where you have it scheduled, because Penn State has traditionally scheduled them very strategically throughout the month of June. But the change of the calendar changed some of these things around. Every
class has been different. They've brought in guys early and had a ton of success. They've brought in guys late and have had a ton of success. Now, last year they brought in guys early and faded away. And there's no looking at this and saying this is the appropriate weekend to make this work. I would say build yourself a buffer and try and be on the back half of that schedule. But as we saw last year, there's guys that they expected to get on visits for, say, the June 16th weekend, and those guys committed to another school on June 10th. So
didn't make it. Yeah,
you're playing personalities there more so than the entire trends and structures of how official visit season works. It just this is a tough one to swallow, that May 16th weekend.
Yeah. So last question is, if we look back at June as a whole and beyond the official visits, because Penn State got several commits during June. As you mentioned, they have 20 commits overall in the class. How do you think this month, as we now enter the final week, has played out for the Nittany Lions? You know, you have your 1 week that we just spent most of the show talking about, but there are other things that happened, and maybe they're setting the table for themselves to get commits here in this final week. I guess, where is the team positioned after those efforts in June, which we said is one of the most important months of the year?
Well, we've continued to forget they have 20 commits. So like, that's something that you can build on. I think the part that sort of stings is you've gotten 2 commits right now from official visitors. I think maybe 1 or 2. You know, you kind of feel like Marlon Bright is a foot in, a foot out type guy who took an official visit, but like, you're looking at Elijah Littlejohn as basically the you know, sort of the returns on that official visit season. And that is lower than average. Like there's a lot of, you can say a lot of things. You can say guys are waiting till the end and things like that. But going back, was it 2 years? When was Jalen Harvey? 2 years. They got 4 guys in the first weekend. Like there's no rhyme or reason to this, right? But at the same time, the return should be more than that. So I know it's a different class, different money structures and things like that. But it's not been great. It's kind of, you feel good, and then all of a sudden they step off a campus, and I can kind of compared it to driving a new car. Like, you drive a new car off the lot, all of a sudden the value goes down. Well, you get them off a campus and they don't commit. Yeah. Your percentage goes down there. So it's not for everyone. And it's not the way that they'll get, because Penn State's going to get some guys, you know, probably, I don't want to say sooner rather than later, but they're going to get some guys coming off of this swing. But that's always been the expectation of that late June, early July sort of rush.
Yep. So last thing here on the BWI live show, last thing here on Fitz's recruiting update, Damari Simeon put out yesterday. He'll be announcing his commitment this Friday, June 17th at 5 p.m. Of course, he's doing 5 p.m. on a Friday. We'd all like to start our weekend, but of course it's his moment. So, we'll be covering that at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Anything to preview Damari's decision coming up this weekend between these 4 schools that you see here? Or if Fitz, if you want to just let us know for the podcast people who are listening, they can't see, who are the schools here?
Yeah, you got Michigan, Penn State, Texas, and Ohio State. He took official visits to all 4 of those. Been very quiet with his recruitment. And that's kind of the entire time. I know he's stayed in regular contact with Penn State, but in terms of the public sphere of things, he's not a big talker there. But he's been to all these schools, and I think he's liked all those schools. I think it's Penn State, Ohio State, really. I know he went to Michigan. I think Michigan was this past weekend, but Penn State, Ohio State is really the 2 that have bubbled up in that one. And those are conversations to be had throughout the week. He's going to decide on, or he's going to announce on Friday. I don't think he has a decision made yet. Like, that's kind of where we find ourselves with some of these guys, is they self-impose a deadline, and then they get down to the nitty gritty. And that's not a word I should have said on the fly live, but it's a situation where they find themselves crunched into the last couple of days. So I'm very curious to see which way Damari Simeon goes. Could see it go either way, Penn State or Ohio State. Gotcha. Well, again, and by the way, Ohio State has a few irons in the fire at defensive tackle as well. So I think that'll matter. All right. Again, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com is where you go to find that information as we go throughout the week. And of course, if that news breaks for the Nittany Lions in a positive way, you can hear about it on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel with our committed video series. So great reason to subscribe. Great reason to be here. We'll be back tomorrow on the Wednesday edition talking about football with Greg Pickle. We'll figure something out to talk about. I'm sure it'll be something to do with something Greg has in mind. He's always got, man, wrestling recruiting all of a sudden got really exciting this week. I have no idea what the hell's going on, but like, it seems like it's really exciting. Yeah. And we talked about that yesterday, and he's like, the people that are in the know have no idea what's going on. So that was his update to me. I'll pass that along to you here on the show, that nobody right now knows what's going on with Bo Bassett other than what has actually happened so far. But we'll be talking about a bunch of things, including football. And you mentioned irons in the fire. Greg has more irons in the fire than anybody. We'll have a good show tomorrow. Greg has a lot of irons and a big fire. Yes.